After knocking off the undefeated Kansas City Chiefs, Josh Allen is the NFL's MVP. That and more on today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso, with the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready, Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome in to the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. Make sure to listen to every episode of Locked On NFL on Amazon Music. I am your host, the madman, Tyler Rowland, joined today, as I am every Monday, by Locked On NFL expert Gino Camilleri. On today's episode, the Cincinnati Bengals season is officially over. The Jacksonville Jaguars need to clean house. And of course, we'll start with Josh Allen being the MVP of the NFL. Do want to thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen each and every day, and for being an everydayer here with us at the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Hillsdale College. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. We got a ton of great football to talk, but we got to start with Josh Allen knocking off the Kansas City Chiefs. And Gino, Josh Allen's my MVP right now.
Without a doubt. I think he showed today on that final 4th and 2 run that he wasn't going to let this thing go down to a field goal or a coin flip in overtime. He was going to put the most important game of the season on his back, finished with a huge run. I think it's unquestionable. FanDuel has him as the favorite right now. He's got to be the MVP favorite.
Yeah, and especially with some of the other things that happened. Lamar Jackson losing, which we're going to talk about here in just a second. Joe Burrow losing to the Los Angeles Chargers on Sunday Night Football. That just helps Josh Allen even more. But 27 for 40, 262, had a touchdown, did have an interception. But again, Josh Allen on the ground, the leading rusher on the day by 35 yards. He had 55 yards on the ground. That incredible touchdown to seal the game at the end. I mean, I talked about this last week. No Dalton Kincaid. No Keon Coleman. Amari Cooper in a soft cast on one of his hands. He did have 2 catches for 55 yards, but I mean, he's just doing it without an elite weaponry around him. And to finally knock off this Kansas City Chiefs team and kind of end some of that voodoo magic. Yeah, you pointed it out with the FanDuel odds. I mean, I can't say much more about Josh Allen and his MVP case. But on the Chiefs side of things, my guy Chris Clark from Locked On Chiefs broke down the Chiefs' view of the loss.
And the Kansas City Chiefs dropped their first game. They lose to the Buffalo Bills 30-21 in a game that really they didn't really ever get started on offense. You look at the first couple of drives, Kansas City threw a pick on the second play of the game. That started off and got the Bills going. The Bills drove straight down the field and got a touchdown on that drive. Kansas City's offense, while they were able to put some points on the board at times, they couldn't sustain drives on a regular basis. They continued to go 3 and out, and that is not how they win games. This team has been winning because they consistently have been moving the ball and getting long drives, 10-play-plus drives. I think they only had one of those in this game, and it wasn't enough. They take on their first loss against the Buffalo Bills. They're going to see them again later this season. Much more on Locked On Chiefs.
I didn't think that the Chiefs were good enough to go undefeated anyways. I think they're probably lucky to be undefeated this long. This doesn't really change anything about how I view the Chiefs. The Chiefs have lost to the Bills 3 straight regular seasons in a row, and then they beat them in the playoffs. So Kansas City is still the same team I thought they were, even after this loss against a good Buffalo team.
This is a Kansas City team that I think is overperformed in terms of the wins that they have, because this isn't the best version of Kansas City that we've ever seen. And I think Chris hit it right on the head. The second play of the game, interception from Pat Mahomes. Talk about efficiency. That has not been his strong suit this year. He has put the ball in a dangerous spot.
Yes.
And against a team like Buffalo, where Josh Allen has limited the amount of turnovers, which was a huge downfall early in his career.
Yep.
You have to transform your game, especially this part of the season. Pat Mahomes and that team, they got to figure it out right now, Ty, because I think the Bills showed the rest of the world the blueprint on how to beat the Kansas City Chiefs. And I think a lot of the teams around the NFL can do exactly that. They don't have Josh Allen, but there are some teams that could give them a run.
Yeah, that's a tough one. It may be the blueprint, but to have that blueprint, you got to have
there's only
some special access. The turnovers for me are the big thing. If the Chiefs don't clean up the turnovers, they're not going to make it back to the Super Bowl. But if they can eliminate the turnovers and just play more clean football, then I think they're going to be perfectly fine. But speaking of, limiting the turnovers, and speaking of, Chris Clark from Locked On Chiefs, we'll go to another Chris from the Locked On Podcast Network. My guy, Chris Carter from Locked On Steelers. Huge win as the Steelers knock off the Ravens.
Hey everyone, Chris Carter here from the Locked On Steelers podcast here at Acrisure Stadium after the Steelers have taken down the Baltimore Ravens 18-16, advancing to 8-2 and claiming a 1.5-game lead in the AFC North. But it was a huge defensive game in this contest. The defense holding the number one scoring offense to just 16 points, getting several big turnovers. Nick Herbig with the punch out, Patrick Queen with the punch out, Peyton Wilson with the interception. The Steelers linebackers making big plays in a big game. And when I talked to the Steelers defensive players afterwards, they all talked about the plan and how the plan was put together well. They studied well. Even on the 2-point conversion, they had to stop to hold on to the lead at the end. Joey Porter Jr. told his team, we're not letting them get it here. And he was the one that had great defense on the play, forcing Lamar Jackson to have to hold on to the ball and eventually making a mistake there. The offense doesn't do well in the red zone, but gets in field goal position and lets Chris Boswell win the game. These kind of games, it just matters that you get the win. We'll talk about more about how they did that on the Locked On Steelers podcast.
Look, Chris is 100% right. In these division games, they're always tougher than a normal game. It's always more difficult than you would have in just a more random opponent. So I'm not surprised that it was low scoring and the Steelers won. Here's the thing with the Steelers, man. Before we hopped on here, I compared them to the Green Lantern. They're the black and yellow lanterns. Like, no matter what the game calls for, you want us to be high scoring, we're going to score. You want us to run the ball, we're going to run the ball. You want us to win the turnover battle and kick field goals to win in an old school 1950s football game, we're going to do that. Whatever the answer to the test is, the Steelers have it in their back pocket, and that sort of resiliency is what is going to carry them. And I think the Steelers are absolutely legit now. They have bought me over. I believe in them. I think they can make a deep playoff run.
To take the offense of Baltimore and make them look pedestrian, that's how they're going to win the Super Bowl, is through that defense. And how cliche that Pittsburgh has a defense that can put them in a Super Bowl run. But right now, Russell Wilson and that offense, they're doing just enough. Hats off to Chris Boswell in a weekend where kickers had a rough go of it. He wins the game for that Steelers team. But I think in that division where they kick the ever-living crap out of each other, Pittsburgh showed that even in the grittiest of environments, that they can win football games, even if they don't have to score points. You're not going to put up over 15 against us, regardless of where you're ranked in terms of offense coming into a game against Pittsburgh, especially if they have to host a game at home now with a lead and a half, or a game and a half lead in the AFC North right now. Look out for those Steelers, man. That's going to be a tough outcome January.
1.5 games, or as Russell Wilson likes to say, we can round that up to 2. But speaking of kicker issues, block kick gives the Packers a win. Evan McPherson misses 2 kicks for the Bengals, and the Jacksonville Jaguars are about to kick Doug Pederson out of the building. It's Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Hillsdale College. Time is our most precious commodity, so don't waste it scrolling through the same mind-numbing content for hours and hours. How can you spend your time wisely to improve yourself? Well, our sponsor, Hillsdale College, is offering more than 40 free, that's right, free online courses, including Constitution 101, the meaning and history of the Constitution, Introduction to Free Market Economics, or The Great American Story, A Land of Hope. All of Hillsdale's courses are self-paced, so you can start whenever. You can tune in wherever. Plus, you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, discussions, or just enjoy the lectures. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. Hillsdale.edu/lockedon. Today's episode is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the most fun and the most simple way to play daily fantasy sports. That's why they have over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. All you have to do is pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. You can run your game all season long on Prize Picks. Prize Picks is my favorite way to play daily fantasy sports, again, because it's just so simple. Prize Picks has a projection for every player, some mock examples. Jamar Chase, 79.5 receiving yards. Patrick Mahomes, 1.5 touchdown passes. Travis Kelce, 59.5 receiving yards. Saquon Barkley, 79.5 rushing yards, something Gino knows plenty about. All you have to do is say more or less. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. It's Prize Picks. Run your game. All right, Gino, let's continue today's recap of Week 11 in the NFL here on the Locked On NFL podcast. Make sure that you get subscribed, stay subscribed. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. But I made a great segue, in my opinion. Just fantastic hosting there with the kick this, kick that. But there's no doubt about it that the Jacksonville Jaguars are about to kick their entire organization out of the building. At least we think. There was a report on Saturday that if Jacksonville lost to the Detroit Lions, that they would be looking to make major changes. And that typically would mean head coach Doug Pederson, maybe general manager Trent Baalke. And then their response is to go out and get drubbed by the Lions 52-6, a complete embarrassment. My guy Tony Wiggins of Locked On Jags, he's ready for some change.
Maybe if we had done this a little bit different. However, today, it leaves no doubt, none. When you sit them side by side, against a team that has it all together, against a team whose coach will be down 52-6 and will challenge a completion, when you sit them side by side with what structure, winning, excellence, not taking anything for granted, accountability, when you sit them next to a team that personifies everything that you want to try to be or that you claim you are, like the Detroit Lions were today, it becomes really, really clear. You don't even have to sit there and figure it out. You don't have to worry about excuses.
Yeah, it's obvious. They got to move on from Doug Pederson. They got to make big change. That roster has way too much talent for where they're at. And you know Doug Pederson well, Gino, so you probably know when it's over for Dougie P.
Incredibly similar to what happened in Philly in his end of his tenure in 2020. The thing that isn't similar is the fact that the GM in Jacksonville probably should also be fired. And I don't know if Trent Baalke is going to be fired, because apparently there's this plan behind the scenes that they want to bring in Bill Belichick to be the next head coach. Whatever it is, the Cons really have to do some deep digging on what is going on in their organization right now. Because if Doug Pederson, somebody who has righted a ship before with Chip Kelly and the Philadelphia Eagles, comes to town and the same exact thing happens and he can't clean it up, there are some internal organizational difficulties that I think need to be challenged moving forward in Jacksonville.
Well, I think one thing that we have to remember here is Shad Khan said before the season that this is the most talented roster Jacksonville has ever had.
Sure.
So to me, what I'm picturing Jafar with the Sultan in Aladdin, and Trent Baalke has the snake stick, and he's like, this is the best roster that this franchise has ever had. If we don't do well, it's Doug Pederson's fault. We have all the talent. I brought you all the talent.
Mm-hmm.
And it's nonsense. It's nonsense to me. They put so many resources into their offensive line. The offensive line isn't good. They put a ton of resources into their linebacker group, and the best players that they've got haven't been the guys that they've drafted at linebacker. Like, the Calvin Ridley debacle, yes, Brian Thomas Jr. is a great player, but to let Calvin Ridley leave and go to a division rival and then sign Gabe Davis, they're lucky they got Brian Thomas Jr. That was a totally mismanaged plan. So to me, I saw the same thing you did, that they might bring in Bill Belichick and pair him with Trent Baalke. What a disaster that would be to bring in a super old coach with this young team and leave Trent Baalke. They need to clean house entirely, in my opinion, and start from the ground up before it's too late. And who knows if they're going to do that.
They have to. And I truly don't know who is the next good hire for them, because you got Trevor Lawrence and that's about it outside of Brian Thomas, man. That's going to have to be a team that tears a lot of those contracts down. I mean, even signing a guy like Eric Armstead to that mega contract, he's not living up to it. How are you going to build with core pieces when arguably you don't really have that many core pieces in the building right now?
Well, I mean, Christian Kirk's money, Gabe Davis's money, Evan Ingram's money. They're going to have to pay ETN eventually. Like, they got the Trevor Lawrence, and you know that all these big time contracts, they get way more punitive as they go along. Like the first couple of years, you can cook the books a little, but yeah, they're in a precarious situation. And I don't know if bringing in old school Bill Belichick and keeping Trent Baalke around is the way to go with that one. But Jacksonville is going to Jacksonville. That's what they always do. So the Green Bay Packers, though, do want to switch gears a little bit here. The Green Bay Packers pull the Kansas City Chiefs and they win. And, you know, they may have won this game, Gino, but I do not trust the Green Bay Packers, even if my guy Peter Bukowski thinks that they're close to greatness.
And that's the thing right now for the Packers, is they are so close. They are so painfully close. And it is painful. And that's what makes this so frustrating, because to put up 8.5 yards per play against this defense is nothing short of remarkable. They move the ball up and down the field on this team. And you lose a red zone trip in the low red zone because you go for it on fourth down. Jordan Love decides to try and take off. Really can't do that there. You have to try and make a throw. Like, there was just no way he was going to run it in there. I know he got down to the 1, but that was really only because the bodies took an extra split second to converge on him. He was not going to make that play. And then you throw an interception in the red zone. That's another Jordan Love mistake.
Look, I love my guy Pete from Locked On Packers, but the Patriots put up 19 points on the Bears last week. Putting up 20 points is not remarkable, in my opinion. The Packers should have done way better, and here's my thing. I don't trust the Packers because Jordan Love has shown over and over and over and over and over and over again that he is going to make a big mistake in a big moment. Yes, he makes good plays in big moments sometimes, but you don't get to play the Bears in the playoffs. There's no way that I trust this Packers team to make any kind of significant movement. They were my Super Bowl pick coming into the year. Not a chance they're going to the Super Bowl. And I don't know if Jordan Love will ever be a player who doesn't make that one critical mistake.
And let me ask you this, Ty. We were talking about mistakes at the beginning of the show. Do you think Jordan Love has a Pat Mahomes offensive output in his body? Do you think he has that ability to overcome those mistakes? Because clearly, I don't think a lot of people do, and that's ultimately what it's going to be with Green Bay. They don't have the guy throwing the football right now that gives me a heavyweight fighter versus a heavyweight fighter. He can go into the ring and knock somebody out. I think Green Bay has the horses around him. I think they have a really good Formula One car, but maybe the guy driving the Formula One car isn't the guy who should be driving the car. And those mistakes, man, it's going to come back and punch you in the face and by the skin of your teeth. This wasn't a divisional game where it's Ravens, Steelers, two powerhouses. The Bears are dead. A team that died after that Hail Mary. If you're Green Bay and have bigger aspirations, you have to dog walk that team. You have to take them out, belt to rear end, and not even make it close. And those critical mistakes, they will keep teams in it, especially in a divisional game.
Look, a lot of the elite quarterbacks in the NFL make their fair share of mistakes. Mahomes has a ton of interceptions this year. We talked about Josh Allen early in his career and even, in the mid of his career, a lot of turnovers, this and that. But to me, Jordan Love has good talent. He doesn't have elite talent like those guys to make up for it. So if you get some of the careless mistakes that you get with some of these elite guys, but you don't get the elite talent to back it up, to me, that's just going to cause problems. And again, look, the Packers are going to make the playoffs. The Packers are a good team, but I don't trust them in the clutch at the end of the day in the NFC to make it happen. But with that being said, speaking of not getting it done in the clutch, what in the world has happened to Evan McPherson? And the Cincinnati Bengals season is over. And although the Bengals lost and the Chargers won the game, the biggest winner of the day from that game didn't even play in it. Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the second half of the NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So you get a hunch in the middle of a game. Open up the FanDuel Sportsbook app. You can check out the latest stats. You can view live play-by-play and so much more on the same exact page where you place your bets. Make sure that you visit FanDuel.com to join today. Again, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Texans, money line, first five. I'm just saying, Monday Night Football is coming up. Go to FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Gino, let's cap off today's Week 11 recap edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. Make sure that you guys check out the afternoon edition of Locked On NFL with Tony Wiggins, the barber in the barber shop, and his team might be doing some crazy stuff on Monday morning. So might be a good time to check in there. Just saying. But with that being said, Sunday Night Football was a banger of a game. The Chargers get up big. The Bengals come back. But ultimately, the Bengals fall short, and their season is basically on life support at this time. My guy Jake Liska from Locked On Bengals broke down the disappointment.
So close and yet so far. The defining words of this Cincinnati Bengals season as they lose another brutally close game off of a massive effort in the second half to come back from a 21-point deficit, and it just wasn't enough. That's been this Bengals season. I'm Jake Liska from Locked On Bengals, and whether it's missed field goals, an opportunity for a pick six, or numerous second and third down plays down the stretch where the Bengals just couldn't quite convert to make the field goal shorter, or to get the clock to run a little bit more, or to get closer to a touchdown, or even to throw to Jamar Chase on a play that goes for a first down that could have been a touchdown instead had Joe Burrow seen that Jamar Chase was wide open. It's that kind of season for the Cincinnati Bengals. They continue to get very, very close to making game-winning plays against good teams and continue instead to lose those games. And with that, likely their playoff hopes in the 2024 season.
The Bengals are dead. I mean, we call them the Bengals. I might call them the little cats tonight. I mean, they just, like, we could talk about Joe Burrow. We could talk about the defense. There's a lot of different things to discuss. But to me, Evan McPherson being one of the best kickers in the NFL as a rookie, all of a sudden falling completely apart, has screwed them out of multiple wins this season. Whether you go back to the Baltimore game, 2 field goals that, yeah, the Chargers scored a touchdown at the end, but we can't pretend like those 2 field goals wouldn't make the game feel a little bit different. I mean, the pressure, the environment, all that changes. I am just shocked by Evan McPherson's fall off, and him not being a high-level kicker has cost the Bengals multiple games, which ultimately will probably hurt their season. I mean, Joe Burrow's playing at an MVP level. The defense could get better, but that one single thing going from a big advantage for them to a massive disadvantage, like, it has just tipped the scales in an unsavable way.
It feels like the scene in Space Jam when they all get their powers sucked out of them, right? And it's like all of a
Right.
sudden, like, we can't play this sport anymore. And Justin Tucker had that same interaction. Jake
Yeah.
Elliott, the same thing. And Evan
The
McPherson
Bears kicker
tonight.
got the kick blocked. Last week, Denver's kicker getting the kick block. Like all these, and people are talking about, oh, we need to narrow the goalpost and make it harder. I think it's quite hard enough, okay?
No, I think special teams at every level of the sport is at an all-time low, and I think we
Right.
are seeing that especially now, and it's a third phase of the game for a reason, man. There's so many hidden points on special teams, and especially in the playoffs, like there's a reason the Chiefs, who we were talking about, like Harrison Butker, why do they have multiple Super Bowls, man? Like, you're not winning without him. He's been clutch. He's been money. I think at the end of the day, though, that the biggest story of the Bengals in 2024, what is their name? Probably the Paper Tiger. Really good on paper. They just can't get it done when it matters, man.
Right.
And you're going to be in a game where your season's on the line. Once again, a very similar outcome to the game that they had against the Eagles a few weeks back as well. You got to win these games. If you have Joe Burrow, who's considered one of the top guys and multiple passing threats and a good offensive play caller, and you're losing these games, you're not going to compete in the AFC, let alone the NFC, where the wild card teams are immaculately better than the wild card teams in the AFC right now.
Well, speaking of the wild card teams in the AFC, the Chargers, everybody's been saying beat a good team, beat a good team. Are the Bengals a good team? I don't know, but that was a good win for the Chargers. They finally let somebody score more than 20 points, and they still found a way to win. But it's hard not to feel that, oh, the Chargers really wanted to Charger this one. They get up big. They let the team come back. I just don't know if they're ready to be clutch and like win playoff games, even if they're a better football team. To me, the real winner of Sunday Night Football was the Denver Broncos, who are now 6-5, and the Bengals are 4-7. The Dolphins are 4-7 now after winning. The Jets lose. They're 3-8. Like, no one's catching the Broncos for that last wild card spot. And the Broncos play the Bengals in a couple of weeks to drive that nail through the coffin even more if the Bengals were to win the next couple of games. You know what I mean? So the real winner of this Sunday Night Football game was the Broncos, because they basically secured a playoff spot in my mind.
The two former Oregon quarterbacks had quite the day, man. You look at Justin Herbert leads a game-winning drive. It feels like Jim Harbaugh finally did whatever sort of prayer that you want to cleanse them of their charging ways. Maybe this is the first step to get out of it.
Right, it could be.
But Denver is a team that each week I watch them, man, it's like Bo Nix is maybe the best rookie quarterback that's not being talked about right now. Their offense, the young playmakers are coming through right now. Cortland Sutton is a top 10 wide receiver by every stretch of the imagination. I don't know what the wild card is going to be at the end of the season. You'll probably see the NFC North team that's not Baltimore or the Steelers get that number one spot. But outside of that, it's going to be the Broncos and Chargers, and they're going to fight for 6 and 7 unless somebody makes a crazy run, which we know can happen in the NFL. I just don't see the team that's going to do it. If it was going to be anybody, it was probably going to be the Bengals. Miami on a fringe chance, but it's pretty locked up right now, man. You're going to see two former Oregon quarterbacks and Justin Herbert and Bo Nix have a chance to win their first ever playoff games. And good by them, because Justin Herbert, he needs it to be in that consideration with these guys who he was drafted with. Gets that win against Joe Burrow tonight. That's a nice one to throw on the back of his checklist. And Bo Nix, Kirk Cousins, he got Kirk Cousins out the game. We saw Michael Penix for a little bit, man. Shout out to Denver Broncos. They're going to be a feisty team. And if the Chiefs weren't so good, you'd be hearing more about them in the West for sure.
It pains me to say it, Gino. It does. I am a certified Bronco hater, no doubt about it. But they get better every single week. And look, Jaden Daniels had an incredible start to the season, but over the last 2-3 weeks, no rookie quarterback is playing better than Bo Nix. Nope. There's no other way to say otherwise. As somebody who, again, certified Bronco hater, they hate me in Denver. I hate you back, but got to give credit where credit is due. Bo Nix has been tremendous, and they're playing really, really solid football. And that's why I like the Broncos over the Falcons on the money line as one of my best bets of the week, which we went 2-2 on best bets this week. So it could be better, could be worse, but 2-2, I'll take it. But that is going to do it for this week 11 recap edition. What an incredible weekend in the NFL. It totally lived up to the hype. But as always, I am your host, the Madman, here with my co-host, Gino Camilleri. Get subscribed, stay subscribed. It's the Locked On NFL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And stay safe out there.